Hi, and welcome to the Keys to Therapy. Today's episode, we have Sivan. Hi,
Hello.
tell us a little bit about you.
So I am an art therapist based out of Maryland, and I primarily see folks who are living with dementia, and then sometimes their caregivers as well.
Oh, wow. So, what kind of work do you do with them?
So oftentimes the work is focused on maintaining abilities that they continue to have, depending on their stage of the illness, the progression of it.
Okay.
It'll kind of change from maintaining ability to reminiscent and life review
Mm.
to just connection and engagement and being in the moment and being present and getting joy out of something. So, really, quality of life becomes the main focus.
Oh, that's amazing.
Yeah.
I feel like there's not a lot of services out there like that.
Yeah, there's very few therapists that will work with older adults in general. And then
Mhm.
if you narrow it even more to art therapists that work with older adults, there's even less. So a lot of the time, once someone gets to certain age, or even right, even getting a neurodegenerative disease like a type of dementia, it's
Mhm.
kind of written off that they're not going to remember seeing you. So why are you going to come anyway? What are they going to talk about? So it's really doing some education that with the expressive therapies, they're the perfect intervention with this population because it doesn't have to be verbally dependent. So we can just engage and connect non-verbally, and it can also, doing the artwork can elicit a lot of memories and connections, and so
Mm.
they can actually start talking about things and remembering things that they haven't in quite a long time. So it's just magical to see when that happens.
Oh, yeah. I bet that's so rewarding.
Mhm.
Wow. Is there a favorite medium that you have or that you've noticed is like the biggest one that most people prefer with that population?
I always go to watercolor.
Oh,
That's my
really?
favorite. Yeah, because it's fluid and it's kind of this different, it's hard to control, yet very expressive. So it's, I think, satisfying no matter what kind of marks you put on the paper, it's beautiful to look at. And so that gives a sense of accomplishment and joy and pride that they have created something beautiful. And it's also easy to manipulate. So you don't need to put a lot of pressure with the hands. You can adapt the paintbrush so that's easier to hold for them. They don't have to worry about drawing straight lines or drawing a lot of fine detailed things. And you can always go back into it and add detail with pens or markers or pencils once it's dry. So I always find that that's a great way to loosen up and just kind of get people into the process of making art versus worrying about the finished product of it.
Oh, that sounds amazing. I have no artistic ability. So as you're describing that, I'm like, so you kind of can't really mess it up. I like
No,
that.
no,
Yeah, that
that's what's wonderful. You don't need any type of art background to
hmm.
do it. I just say, as long as you're open and willing to play a little bit and see what happens, that's really what it's about.
Oh, that's amazing. Yeah. So I'm really excited for today's episode because this is a population I haven't worked very much with and I don't know a lot about. So I am going to learn some stuff today. And I always like when that happens for me. Oh, so I'm like, yay, I get to still learn. What I wanted to start with are like I guess the first question is, and there's my dog. How did you end up specializing with older adults?
Yeah, I went into art therapy. I always knew I wanted to be an art therapist. But I wasn't initially, I thought I wanted to work with kids with autism.
Hmm.
So I was like, okay, that's in my brain. I went to grad school, and my first internship was with older adults at a what's called a mother house, which is retired nuns and priests live at.
Whoa.
That was associated with my college. Yeah, I didn't know.
I didn't
So
even know
that
that
was
was a
interesting.
thing.
Number one, to go see little Jewish girl walking in with these like nuns and priests. It was fun. Um, but I worked on the dementia unit doing groups, and I just fell in love with them and just being able to connect and hearing their stories and seeing them engage and helping them engage in something and kind of see the lights come on for a little bit as they talked with each other and looked at things and told their stories. And just shared this space with other people doing similar things, and they were able to be present in the moment, which is really what dementia is about, right? Because you can't remember the past at all, and you
Mhm.
sometimes get confused about what's coming forward and that kind of thing. So it's really helping people remain present in the moment and enjoy that moment and get the most out of it. And so from then, I was just like, I need to work more with these folks. I love it.
Wow. See, I like how open you were, right? Because sometimes we go into school or we go into our first jobs or whatever it is, thinking like, this is who I'm going to work with. And then
Mhm.
you get put in a new situation that maybe sounds like, well, we'll see what happens. And then you love it. So I think
Yeah.
it proves, especially earlier in your career. I remember there was a lot of pressure of like picking a niche, like who's going to be your population or who do you want to work with? It became almost the new, like, what do you do for work? But in grad school, it was like, who do you want to work with?
Yes.
And
Yeah.
I think that proves that it's important to be flexible because you don't know
Mhm.
maybe who you want to work with yet.
Yeah, you can find a connection with a group that you previously thought you wouldn't work well with, or you were intimidated to work with, or you didn't think you had anything in common with. But I think sometimes those are the ones to try, whether it works out or not, because it teaches us about ourselves. And grad school is the place to absolutely do it, to find out what you enjoy and don't, and where you're like, okay, no, I know that this is no longer for me. That's fine, right? And that's
Mhm.
almost as important as finding the people you want to work with, I think, is finding the folks that you don't really connect with and you're
Yeah.
kind of, yeah, that you don't want to work with, so that you don't end up getting into a situation where you're working with a population that you're not doing your best work with because you don't connect with them
Hmm.
and nobody's benefiting. Yeah.
No, and I think you're right because I think sometimes it's a lot easier to, I guess, clarify who you don't want to work with, right? Like the list of who you want to, or even sometimes like, well, I could. That gets too
A
long.
big one. Yes. So just because we should work with people does not mean that yeah,
Yeah.
or we could work with people doesn't mean that we should.
No, definitely not.
Yeah.
So it sounds like that experience just kind of was a light bulb moment for you as well to be like,
Mhm.
"Oh, I like that."
Absolutely.
So it was that something that you then immediately pursued, or did you just kind of keep coming back to it as your career went on?
I pursued. So I kept
Okay.
in the back of my mind that I knew. So I tried to get the other internships with older adults. I did my thesis work with older adults.
Wow.
Um, Tried to look for jobs when I first got out of grad school. Number one, finding a job as an art therapist is not always as easy. There's a smaller window of folks who actually hire art therapists. Now that there's licensure, it's a bit easier in different states. But initially, that was tough. And so I found myself working in a psych hospital. Yep, which was completely new to me, inpatient psych.
Oh.
But even there, I found I would go to the older folks who
Mhm.
were there. And it was great because not a lot of folks wanted to work with them, or they didn't know what to do with them.
Mhm.
And so being able to kind of use these skills and enjoying working with that population was wonderful. And then when I left there, I went and worked specifically with older adults in long term care so that I could keep working with them. Yeah.
Yeah. Oh, that's awesome. So once you found
Mhm.
it, you were like, these are it. Like these people.
Yeah. Yep. I love it. Yeah.
Oh, that's so amazing. Well, you mentioned, there's a lot of factors that go into working with that population. There's a lot of stuff that they specifically have, like certain unique challenges. And then there's some that therapists face when working with those populations. So when it comes to the clients, like, what are some of the challenges that you've noticed that older adults face in general, and then definitely with mental health?
Hmm. In general, I think some of it is it's interesting because on one hand, they're open to new things. They kind of have this like, why not sort of situation. What do I have to lose to try this? Right. So even if they've never done art in their life, if you approach it again from a low pressure, sort of just playful, we're going to do it and see what happens, they are
Mhm.
more open to engaging in things. Um, but older generations now, because they were raised where we don't talk about mental health,
Yeah.
it's taboo, we don't admit to it, it's shameful,
Mm.
right? That I find can be a barrier to getting people help. especially if they're high functioning, like high functioning depression or anxiety. If they've had chronic mental illness, they've been in the game for a while and they totally get it and it's fine,
Mhm.
right? But for a lot of folks who depression is so common in older adults because of all the losses and transitions and things that go on, but it's kind of written off as like, well, that's life. So you just deal with it, right? And so
Mm.
they were always taught to just like, well, that's life. So I have to deal with it. And my life is actually really good. I'm safe. I have, but they're not given that space to mourn all the losses and the changes and the independence and all these complicated things that go on watching your peers pass.
Yeah.
And so it's really, I think, for them, destigmatizing that going and getting mental health support is no different than going to the podiatrist or getting your blood pressure checked or any of that. And that it's so, especially depression, is so easily treatable. Like, you don't have to live like this.
Mhm. Yeah, and
Yeah.
like you said, depending on, like, their generation, their family background, like, all these different factors that
Yeah.
go in. This may be
Yeah.
something that their mental health in general might be something that they've never talked about, or they just have such an aversion to for
Hmm.
whatever reason.
Yeah.
And so I think that just kind of getting the buy-in and also letting them know what the resources
Yeah.
are, because a lot of them
Yeah.
just might not even be familiar with what's out there for them.
No, and they have no idea. I find insurance is a big barrier in that because they've never talked about it,
Mhm.
they don't know how to use their insurance to cover stuff. They don't even know what to ask for. A lot of folks
Mm,
think they need to go directly to a psychiatrist. And you're like,
yeah.
whoa, no, like that's not, no, like you probably don't even need one. Like, go, so that's some of the education I do with groups and folks is just these are the different providers you can pick from. This
Mhm.
might make sense. These are the words you might hear. It's just that general education in the community. Because again, nobody talks about it. And we get so focused on physical issues that come up
Yes.
that's where when people say therapy, they think physical therapy, right?
Mhm.
OT. They'll be more than happy to do those things because of mobility stuff. And sometimes that overshadows the mental health piece of it.
Mhm.
And they don't realize that how much the connection between pain and mental health, or even just mobility and mental health. And so treating this one aspect of it is going to be so important for the rest of it. And so having even clinicians learn more and be more savvy of how to help folks make that connection, that treating
Mhm.
the mental health is absolutely part of treating your physical wellness and any other piece of yourself and how much that can help them.
Yeah, and it sounds like maybe for therapists working with this population, there's gonna be a lot of education. It sounds like there's a
Yeah.
lot of education, and then there's also maybe they need to take a more holistic approach than possibly even people in other age brackets. Because like you said, a lot of people at this stage of life, they have a lot of doctor's appointments. They have a lot of different physical things going on. There's a lot of ailments. So you sort of need to look at like the whole body in a way that
Mhm.
maybe you don't always look at so much with younger people.
Yeah. Yeah,
Yeah.
absolutely. I think there's a needs to be a lot of education with general practitioners as well,
Mhm.
primary care
Yes.
doctors, because they're the ones that are going to see it first. And this is with any population, right? But being able to advocate because people are more, as older adults, they're more likely to get treatment if it will help a physical ailment. So if you
Mm.
can make that connection for them, then that's going to be a game changer. And then they're so surprised at like my pain's better, like I didn't realize, because all the things that, as we know, if we do mind body work, how much our mental health will show up physically,
Yep.
that people just don't, because again, it wasn't talked about,
Mm.
so how are they supposed to know?
Right. And
Yeah.
like you said, a lot of it
Hmm.
gets normalized, right? Like I think of,
Yeah.
it's a cliche, but kind of like the older women sewing circles where it's like, did you hear so and so passed? Did you hear that this happened? Like it just kind of becomes part of the language without anybody maybe actually processing some of what's
Hmm.
happened. So
Hmm.
yeah, being able to educate them on that, I think would be helpful. And for therapists, what do you think are some of the challenges that they face when working with this population, besides then having to educate a lot in the beginning?
Yeah, I think initially it's therapists being afraid to work with the population. I
Mhm.
find quite often, right, as our society as a whole, right? If we talk about like white cis society and stuff, don't have a great relationship with the aged population. Ageism is still a huge, huge issue.
Yeah.
And so if we never grew up being around older adults and being comfortable with them, then that's a scary thing. And it reminds us of death. Like, let's be
Mhm.
honest, right?
True.
Working with older adults reminds us of our mortality and death, and it's not always cute. And so having to work with someone, and it's always going to come up because
Mhm.
whether they're healthy and wonderful, whatever, they're processing the last chapters of their lives. So it's also preparing them and being death positive to say, what do you want? How can I advocate for you so that this last chapter of your life is going to be the best that you can expect? Because you
Mm.
don't just have to fade into the background and kind of just let it come. You have a lot of agency in this. So it's doing our own work around how can we be look at it as advocacy
Mhm.
versus just kind of helping maintain, or seeing that how much that would be beneficial for the population, and kind of doing our own work about death and dying and age and whatever else preconceived notions that we have about it,
Mhm.
so that we can be as supportive as possible, because especially this is such a huge population and it's only getting bigger, that
Yes.
it's so so needed.
Yeah. And was there any of that talked about in your grad school program?
Oh no.
Mine either. As you're talking, I'm like,
No, not at all.
literally never mentioned. So,
Yeah, no. It was kind of like, oh, that's great. And I remember in a supervision group, we were talking about stuff, and I think we were kind of like processing, why are
mhm.
you working with your population? And da, da, da. And it came out like I didn't grow up around older adults. Actually, I was not close with my grandparents.
Mm.
And so in a way, right, part of me, it is kind of this surrogate grandparent relationship
Mhm.
that I never had. And it is absolutely, delightful to bring joy to these people and these different things. But no, it is never talked about whatsoever.
That's crazy to me that, like,
Yeah.
none of it, and we all, I mean, if we're lucky enough to become older, like, then
Yes.
that's amazing, but a lot of people do. So how is this huge chunk of life never discussed? I mean, I
Hmm.
think the only thing we got close to was maybe with, like, the Erickson stages of life, that there may
Yeah.
be, like, a sentence about, "And then at this stage, here's where they are." And then that was
Yeah. Kind of like the Kubler Ross grief stuff.
yeah, yeah.
But, other than that's also too, I think more talked about like when someone loses a child or you lose your
Yes.
spouse, or right, those types of things that absolutely happen, but we associate more with getting mental health treatment for,
Mhm.
obviously, Um, but it's not the sexy, fun population to work with, so we don't talk about it, right?
Right. Oh,
Yeah.
which is so crazy because, like you said, with medical advancements and everything else, people are just getting older and they're living
Yeah.
longer. And
Yeah.
I know a lot of my family was like teen moms, but at one point, we had
Mhm.
5 generations living at the same time. When my sister had my nephew,
Wow.
to my great grandma, and we have like,
Wow.
I don't know, like a Christmas photo randomly, but 5 generations in one photo. That was like unheard of before.
Yes. Yeah.
So it's just insane to me that that's just not discussed a lot. Uh, yeah, good thing you're here today
Yeah.
talking about it, because somebody's gotta, because again, everybody coming up, I'm sure grad school programs haven't changed that much, like in the 10, 11 years since I've been. So like,
Yeah. Yeah.
come on, this is crazy. So yeah, I think some of the challenges therapists may face too is, which kind of goes in my next question, but there's not a lot of resources that maybe you're provided in formal education. So
Mhm.
what type of training or resources, or I guess like strategies, would you recommend for therapists who may be interested in just learning more about working with older adults?
Yeah. I think figuring out, um, yeah, because you're right. It's hard to find continuing education about older adults.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yes, absolutely. Um, and so I've found a couple, there's and I can send you the link. It's the Center for Mental Health for Older Adults. I think it's Dr. Regina Kep does it. She's amazing. She's a psychologist, and that's the only population she works with.
Wow.
And earphones always jump out of my ears. And she's a amazing advocate. She's the one I worked with to get, I'm certified in dementia and sexual health, to help advocate and do
Wow.
that whole side of it as well.
Yeah.
Another thing that is not talked about whatsoever.
Mm-mm.
Um, yeah, it's kind of looking if you're specifically interested in dementia, then I would go to any of the big dementia organizations. Oftentimes provide continuing education or just education, and a lot of them they offer CEUs for. The Alzheimer's Foundation of America, I find, is excellent because they will also talk about regular aging stuff, and I have found that they touch on neuropsych stuff, and more than just kind of your run of the mill sort of what do you do if someone refuses bathing type of
Mhm.
thing.
Okay.
Um, and as you look more into those types of organizations, Lewy bodies, whichever one, you're also going to kind of find, you're going to find the experts on aging, which is helpful. And so you can kind of find people to follow. And then also, they're always going to talk about what's normal aging versus not normal aging. So depending to what sort of area or facet of aging that you want to work with,
Yeah.
um, that can be a way. That's how I found resources and ways to kind of continue with my education, and I'm very dementia focused, but
Mm.
just in general kind of figuring out how to help folks, because then the grief part of it is such a huge piece of
Yeah.
it as well, that's a way too.
No, that makes sense as well. Yeah,
Yeah.
because whether it's grief with their age, if it's grief with the other people that they've lost, if it's grief with
Yeah.
independence, like you said, I mean, I know
Yeah.
that's something I've seen come up a lot with,
Yeah.
family or even my clients and their families, because so many of them are now caregivers or that sandwich generation.
Yeah.
So having that piece and the trying to understand what that looks like for them, like losing the independence is an entire different type of grief. And
Yes.
a lot of caregivers, or at least in the earlier stages, some of them that I've seen, don't
Yeah.
understand why that is such a battle. Like, but you'll be taken care of.
Mhm.
You'll have everything you need, but there's other people
Yes.
your age there or whatever it is.
Yes.
So
Yes, absolutely. I think that is a really good point that I find for folks who are caring for their parents, right? Which is very different. A lot of my work is actually with women identified who are caring for their spouses,
oh
which is
wow.
a different dynamic.
Yeah.
But with the kids, I do find they have a harder time. That is a lot of the educational work that I do with them is kind of reframing what is going on and saying, well, it makes sense because they've lost this, this, and this, and kind of that empathy piece of how would it feel, right? Even
Mhm.
though, yeah, this makes sense. This is for their safety. It's that validation that this is difficult. And this might be why this is behaviors or whatever. They're pushing back, or you don't understand why mom's angry and irritable all the time. It's,
Yeah.
well, she has to live with her kid and she doesn't have her, like just all
Yep.
this stuff that as we never picture ourselves being in that situation when
Mhm.
we think of ourselves as getting older, right? We're always those older adults going to the golf club or right, like whatever,
Yeah.
just independent with their little golf carts, scooting around, living their lives, going to wine
Right.
tastings or whatever on the beach. Um, and so that's really hard for people to let go of.
Yeah, and I think that's a good point too. And then even if you aren't sure that you specifically want to work with older adults, at some point you're going to work with people who are
Yes.
dealing with older adults. So
Yes.
there should be at least like a minimal amount of education or knowledge that new therapists have because they're going to
Hmm.
come across these things, whether
Hmm.
it's they work with children and their grandma's in the home
Yes.
or whatever that or they're dealing with whatever other family dynamics are happening. As I've seen a lot lately with younger adults that are dealing with if their parents had them later in life, which is now the trend.
Yep.
And so
Yes.
they're younger, thinking about having their own kids or do have little kids. And then now they have to take care of their parents or make
Hmm.
arrangements or have
Hmm.
conversations even about stuff
Yes.
like that, which is
Yeah.
difficult. So
Mhm.
no matter what population you work with, it's going to come up at some point. So,
Absolutely.
but is there any steps that you think, anything additionally that maybe newer therapists can do to prepare for either working with this population or kind of by proxy? Anything that they personally could do or anything? I know you mentioned a lot of educational resources. I don't know, anything you think that they maybe need to work on for themselves to be able to work with this?
Yeah, I think initially it just starts with acknowledging that this is a thing,
Yeah.
right? Like this
Yes.
even if you love working with kids and you're doing, like parent training therapy, like more and more, there's that sandwich generation of, yes, you are trying to figure out how to parent your children, but yet your relationship with your parent or older adult in your life, because
Yeah.
sometimes it's an aunt or whatever, right,
True.
is changing. Because even if they're not coming to live with you, it's figuring out and making sure that all their medical stuff is in place. Do they have a will? I find that surprisingly enough, a lot of older adults and people do not have wills
No.
because they don't want to think about it. But
Yes.
Lord, please, if anybody, get your estate in order. You are
Yes.
never too young to start talking about that stuff and getting your advance directives and all of that. It will save your family so much grief come the future. And that's actually a good way to, I find, bring it up with folks. I did it with my own parents. I just was like, do you guys have this stuff? They're like, no. I
Mhm.
was like, yeah, okay. We need to do, because some of it is, if something were to happen, what do you want? Right. Again,
Yeah.
it's coming from the lens of advocacy. This isn't me controlling. This isn't about who gets what. This is, if you can no longer make decisions,
Mhm.
let me know how I can best support you
Mhm.
if the unexpected happens, because it does.
Yeah.
So I think some of it is just as therapists recognizing that this might come up. And so if you have a client who has an older adult, older parent, even just like adjacent in their life,
Mhm.
being cognizant and aware, okay, this might come up at some point. Even if this has nothing to do with what they are coming to with therapy,
Yeah.
if they are active, in their life, then you need to be aware that this could happen. And so these are the things to think about. Or if it does, then you're ready to be like, absolutely, this is what, these are the resources I know about. This is the stuff to go do, so that you can
Mhm.
provide that resource, even if you don't do the work yourself,
Yep.
for them, instead of just like, oh, I'm not going to deal with it. It's not anything that comes about.
Yeah, or like
Yeah.
you mentioned earlier, which I think is sometimes the biggest block for therapists, is their own issues with it.
Yeah.
Like, I don't want to talk about death, or that's bizarre. I've seen that over and over again with people being like, oh, whether it's, in sessions you mentioned too early with older adults and sex, people with sex in general, a lot of times
Oh, yeah.
therapists are like, "Oh, I'm not gonna talk about that." So, like, I don't know if I should ask
Yeah.
about that. I don't know where the line, and I feel like it's like that with the death as well, of, I don't know
Mhm.
if I should bring this up, or is this gonna depress them if I talk about this? And it's like,
Yeah.
but we need to be real, and we're helping our clients by
Mhm.
helping them through these things, even if it's stuff maybe they haven't really thought about, or if they've got some of their own blocks with it, we need to work through ours to be able to help them
Yes.
with theirs.
Yeah.
So, and I love that you mentioned too, like your own personal experience with talking to your parents. I mean, I've seen it usually starts with the family. Some families don't talk about death, dying, age at all.
Yeah.
Or if they
Yes.
do, and that was something else I wanted to ask you about now that I'm thinking about it, is there's
Yeah.
so much in our culture that's anti-aging. Every
Yeah.
day I see
Yeah.
something about a cream, an exercise, a supplement, something that's anti-aging. So do you think that may be contributing in some ways to our society, I guess, is overall resistance to talking about older adults or working with them or
Oh
anything?
yeah, 100%. Because especially with women, right?
Yes.
We have been taught that we cannot show up any place without looking a certain way. And how
Mhm.
much the media, for these people, who are out in the media more, how criticized they are. And what is reported about women in society and what is paid attention to is anything to do with appearance, right? That's the value. So because we are never talking about getting older in a positive way, it's never like, God, I'm so grateful for all these experiences I have. Like, this is what I've learned. Like, oh my, because if
Yeah.
you talk to, right, like, I would never go back to my early 20s. Are you kidding me? No, that was awful.
It's like too much
So awful.
confusion and stress.
Yes.
And,
Oh
I
my
just
gosh.
yeah.
Yes, it gets better, everybody. It gets way, way, way better.
Right.
um that it's embracing, and working through and acknowledging the ageism that comes, because it's huge. That is
Mhm.
one of the only, people are working on so many things, but ageism is one of the things that doesn't go down, because again, it is in our culture. um, in general, it isn't prized, right? Nobody's like,
Yeah.
nobody looks at somebody, we're like, oh wow, I can't, that's amazing that they've lived that long, but we don't see them as a resource and a valuable person, or that can continue to contribute to society. We kind of just
Mhm.
push them off. And I think that's a big piece of it too. That is a lot of the work with older adults, even if they have dementia, is we need purpose. We
Yeah.
need to feel like we are contributing to something, whether it's our household, whether it's talking with other people, right? And so helping folks find that sense of meaning and purpose and continue to be relevant, really,
Yeah.
right? To feel like I'm still relevant and people need me and I have something to continue to give, even if I can't get out of bed anymore. I'm losing these different aspects of myself, or I can no longer take care of the house like I used to. You are still so worthy of all the things, and you still have so much to give.
Mhm.
And I think that's a message that we don't talk about or give at all. Um, and so we never receive it. And so since we never receive it, we don't know how to give and put it out there that it's absolutely yes, because they're kind of the throwaway, like, oh, we're done.
Yeah. Out of
We're
sight, out
not,
of mind.
which is tragic. Yes. And it tends to be, white culture traditionally. There's
Yeah.
lots of awesome aspects of different cultures where they do really take care of and revere
Mhm.
and want, like you're saying, like the five generations, just like
Yeah.
what a gift that is to be able to have those connections
Mhm.
that I think a lot of, myself included, weren't able for different reasons, but didn't grow up with. So I have no idea
Right.
what that's like to have, close family around growing up and different things. And so, how can we kind of bring back those values that even if it's not logistically possible to have our parents in our house or do whatever, it's keeping that connection and helping
Mhm.
them, you know, um, feel like there's still something to get up in the morning for.
Right. Because gosh, you're mentioning depression earlier. How depressing is that?
Yeah,
To just
absolutely.
feel like you've been thrown away, have lost your independence, have lost most of the people you've known and grown up with,
Mhm.
maybe were married to, or family, or whatever else. And yeah, I just feel like there's so much of this population that's ignored. And even when I think about like pictures of older people, actors, or anything, I mean, like you just don't really see that in this
No.
culture. And it's sad because I feel like it just hides aging. And then when somebody does, or gosh, with the plastic surgery now too, who was it the other day? Justine Bateman, I think, came out and was like,
Mm.
I haven't done anything to my face. And people were like, she looks old. And she's like, I look my age. You guys just aren't used to seeing people aging naturally anymore in
Yes.
the media. So it
Yeah.
creates this like more stigmatized version of aging, or this kind of, oh,
Mhm.
she's doing it wrong because she actually looks natural. So I think
Yeah.
there's a lot. And maybe, going back to what new therapists can work on, maybe some of their own barriers with
Yes.
aging, with health, with illness, even. Because I've known
Mhm.
people specifically who, anytime somebody is sick or diagnosed with something, they immediately just like push back because it makes them
Mhm.
uncomfortable.
Yeah.
So coming to grips with our own mortality, and
Absolutely.
that'll make
Yeah.
everyone a better therapist, I think. Because again, even if you don't want to work with death or illness, it's gonna come up in your work at some point.
Yeah, exactly. Because even if it's, working with teens, I have a good friend who he specifically works with teens who have lost a parent. Like
Mhm.
there's loss and grief through it all. And so we need to be comfortable with it as a fact, and the fact that it can happen at any time, that it will show up ready. Whether we're ready for it or not. And so we can choose to be ready for it, or we can kind of continue to push it aside and be like, no, it's not going to be relevant to me, or it's not going to happen, or I don't have to deal with it because it's not front facing until it does. And then,
Oof, it smacks you in the face then because you
oh
haven't
crap
prepared
moment.
for it at all.
Yes. Yeah. Yep.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
that's what I tell a lot of my clients who I can think of one fairly recently that is an adult that brought their parent in to be like,
Mhm.
we've got a lot of stuff that we need to work on.
Yeah.
And one of the primary things we talked about was, is there a will in place? So this person's almost 80. There's nothing. So that became the focus of a lot of our sessions. So I'm having to do research and stuff in between
Yeah.
to be like, I actually don't know what resources there are for people with Medicaid or people who are lower income or have no income and are
Yeah.
living on Social Security. Like there's just so many pieces out here that I feel like, again, they really aren't discussed, or they aren't things like I didn't know I would have to look up those things and talk about it, but that's what came up. So I think if we all have kind of even just like a little mini toolbox of some of the
Yeah.
information, like a sampler plate of
I
certain,
think it goes back to in grad school,
yeah.
touching upon this life planning, right? Like,
Mhm.
number one, having a course that talks about aging and older adults and things that
Yes.
happen in normal aging versus not normal aging and what, those types of things. Um, and then just resources and things. Because again, and I find a lot with folks who get a dementia diagnosis in their world, unless you're in the elder care world, you don't know anything. Like, you don't know where to go. And a lot
Mhm.
of primary doctors don't know where to send you. And so, unless you happen to know somebody who is in that sphere,
Yeah.
it's even scarier because, well, where do I do now? Like, what? And there's so many amazing resources and things out there that can be so helpful and make the whole journey and situation just so much easier for the person who's diagnosed and living with dementia, and then the person who has to care for them or is wanting, whatever, or coordinating care, right? Again, even if
Right.
you're not the one caring for your parents, it's knowing that they are these things. So it's starting, I think, even just when we're little baby therapists in grad school,
Mhm.
that this is something that will happen that is important to know, and this is why, whether or not you come in contact. Because you're absolutely right. It's wills and things come into estate planning, comes into play way before we think it should. It should come way earlier than it does.
It really should. So,
Yeah.
yeah, and I've seen all the drama after things weren't in place. That's what I've gotten
Yes.
with before a lot. So, and the family,
Yep.
yeah, there's like a lot of stuff that comes up with that. So, it was before grad school. I took a year off in between to kind of figure out like which license to do and all that stuff. But I worked in a residential place and they had us giving the clients the advanced directives and filling them out with them. And I was like a group therapist, but I had a bachelor's. And they were like, "Here,
Right.
you've got to sit with your clients and work on filling out these advanced directives." I'm like, "I don't even know what that is. I'd never even heard that word before at 22."
No. Yeah.
So I was just like, "What is this?" And then so they kind of had to like briefly explain to us. And then now I'm talking to all of my, and I worked at a place with, it was residential for schizophrenia. Paranoid schizophrenia. So then it was on a whole nother level of the thing I was talking about. And they also had all committed a crime. And so they couldn't be put in the system. So they were here. There was so many layers to this. But
Yes.
my
Yes. Yeah.
first
Yeah. Yeah.
conversations were,
Yes.
my job made me talk about it and I didn't even understand it. So
Mhm.
you may be put, depending on the settings you're at or whatever else, like in certain situations where you have to. So I think you're
Yeah.
right. If you can, I mean, I wish grad schools would change and have, obviously like broader education topics instead of just theories. For the most part, but I think for newer therapists to maybe seek out some of these things on their own, even if like it's just like bits and pieces, basic knowledge of resources,
Yeah.
what diagnoses, what's the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's, what does that look like, how do our families affected, the trickle down
Mhm.
effect, if this person gets diagnosed you don't work with them, but how's the grandkid feel, like there's so
Yeah.
many things to this.
Yeah. It's
um
very nuanced. Yeah.
yeah, so I just love that you're working with this population because I think there needs to be more resources for them, and that's part of it, right? I bet you've come up with your own barriers at times with treatment options because
Mhm.
there just isn't very many. Oh,
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. It's trying to educate and figure out what is going to work best for this person in this
mhm.
individual situation. And then again, a lot of it feels like is advocacy work
Yeah.
of moving away from the medical model to the more holistic piece of it. Because again, we get so bogged down in the physical side of it, the physical ailments, that the rest just kind of gets swept under the rug. And so we
Mhm.
do a disservice to folks by not looking at them as a whole and continuing to see them. And I find that with dementia work too, even as we start looking at them as the dementia And so we stop seeing them as the person who they were before with the dementia, and how much that impacts how the dementia shows up and how you can support that person as well.
That makes a lot of
Yeah.
sense. Because,
Hmm.
I mean, if everybody else is dealing with their own type of grief, then that's going to get projected onto the client who's experiencing their own form of it. And so, yeah, I think sometimes a lot of people, what I've heard people talk about who have worked with this population is how like infantile, like everybody, when you're older, you suddenly get treated very much like a child.
Yeah.
And so you get even some of the language that gets you, oh, there's look at that cute old person, like some of these things that are just kind of demeaning at times. So
Yes.
yeah, being able to educate yourself too on what's the acceptable language, what,
Yeah.
even being able to, I guess, just in general, like you said, kind of talk about some of these things, but come up with your own, what are your own biases about some of this stuff and how do you work
Hmm.
with that so it's not accidentally coming through in sessions and possibly offending people. So,
Yeah. Right. Or inadvertently reinforcing
yeah.
these ideas of, and it is difficult because if you're caring for a parent, there is that shift. And I think it very much, right, becomes the child becomes the parent kind of
Yeah.
situation. And there's actually a lot of overlap. And I think this would be an amazing study of looking at how you were raised
Hmm.
impacts how you care for your parent.
I bet.
Because like family trauma and all that stuff aside, that absolutely impacts how you react to how the dementia shows up in whatever way it does.
Hmm.
And so, as a caregiver, understanding, and that's some of the work and education I love to do, is understanding how and why that is. And so that you are better aware of, okay, this isn't this, like this is because it starts to show up, in disruptively, let's say, right?
Yeah.
But there's always a reason for it. It's forgetting that, okay, this is a brain disease. They're literally like losing their brain. And so, no, they are
Right.
not willfully. But if they're refusing something, or you view it as them being bratty, you are going to respond to it as you would, if you don't know any better, as
Hmm.
you would a child that was being bratty.
Yeah.
No, that's not going to work. And they
No.
will show you that it doesn't work.
Right. They're gonna remind you who's the parent at the end of the day, and
Yeah.
it's
Yeah.
not gonna work out that well. So,
Mm,
yeah, that's
no.
a really important point too, kind of how those cycles can repeat. And yeah, that's interesting. So again, there's just so much here, so layered,
Yeah.
so many different aspects of it. And I think it all just gets kind of put under the umbrella of working with the older people instead
Hmm.
of like all these different things that come with it. So
Hmm.
I appreciate you being able to come and talk about some of this
Yeah.
today and hopefully enlightening a lot of newer therapists on
Yeah.
areas where there's most likely gaps in their education.
Hmm.
Um, so again, maybe a sentence or two here or there is not going to cover it.
No,
So,
and also I think as therapists, as we grow, and anyway, is recognizing this is not my area of expertise. Let me get some help with it. Let me get a consult on it. Where can I reach out to someone who works with, so that I can better support my client in that, and knowing
mhm,
that's what a good therapist does. That is okay to
yeah,
reach out to somebody who specifically works with that population to give you guidance so that you can better help your client as it shows up. And it doesn't mean they're going to take your client. It doesn't mean what it, right? It's
right.
just, which I think is part of some of the toxic culture that comes with things. But
Mhm.
nobody wants your client. It's fine. You keep
Oh,
them. Let me just help you
right.
better do.
Right. We're good. Like, it's
Yeah,
fine.
it's
There'll
fine.
be
It's fine.
more.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. But yeah, just being able to say, wow, this is beyond me.
Yeah.
And that's okay. Let me learn more about, where can I do that? Who can I get support from,
Hmm.
that I can, yeah, educate myself, but then better be able to help my client.
Absolutely. And that's why I like doing interviews like this with people who are talking about stuff I don't know that much about,
Yeah.
because it's like I've been in the field in some way or another since 2009. It's 2023. I don't know a lot about this, and like
Yeah.
some bits I do know has been because it's fallen into my lap where a client comes
Yeah.
in for one issue and then now all of a sudden there's something else going on and then we've got to pivot.
Yeah.
So, and then I've had to little bits here and there educate myself where I can. But again, it's hard when all of this is brand new to you, which is why I'm so glad you're
Mhm,
here. Because then if
mhm.
people can, because I'll link some of the resources you mentioned below, people can educate themselves on certain things. They can look at some of their potential biases about aging, illness, dying, talking about wills, whatever else, and maybe
Yeah,
inspire some people to make some changes, not only personally, but professionally too.
yeah, absolutely.
Be a better therapist because of it. Probably a better
Yeah.
person. We all get our wills and stuff together. It's
Honestly,
like
please, people, estate planning. I cannot.
yes.
It is just so, again, unless you've gone through it with someone who doesn't have it, who's passed and doesn't have anything in place, it's
Yeah,
really a gift for your family.
absolutely. So it might
And
be
again,
off.
it's about putting down what is important to you.
Mhm.
And so making sure that your wishes are understood and can be respected and people know. Because again, we don't know unless somebody tells us how they might want something done or not done and
Yeah.
that type of thing. And so, yeah, really making sure that we keep that quality of life piece at the forefront of mind because that's what that's about.
And I love how you framed that. Like, I wanna know what your wishes are versus like,
Mhm.
so when you die, like what
Yeah.
because for some reason people just think talking about like you don't even need to use the word. But
No.
if you don't want to, if you it freaks you out too bad, just have those conversations. Have you thought about what your wishes are for the
Yeah.
future?
What if this were to happen? What do you
Yes.
want me to do for you?
Mhm.
Right? Like, how can I best support you when and if this happens? And again, I think a lot of people get stuck in they're scared because they don't want their person to think that they want them to die or
Right.
they think it's imminent or like whatever,
Yeah.
or it becomes like a matter of property and will and who gets what. No, it
Yeah.
has nothing to do about that. It's about, especially the advanced directives and all of that type of thing and power of attorney.
Oh,
It's,
yeah.
I, making it easier for that person to go through that end of life process as much as possible,
Mhm.
whether they're able to make those decisions or not. Because at some point, right, even if you're able to, you don't want to. That's not what you should be worrying about necessarily.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
So, and I think even just being more open about some of those conversations will
Mhm.
make some of the stuff revolving around aging and death and all that just less stigmatized if we
Absolutely.
just make it part of normal conversation.
Exactly. It's being aging positive, right? Death positive. This is just, it happens. Like,
Yeah.
we can't get away from it. And so we might, again, either you're prepared for it or you're not. So we might as well look at it and kind of start that flow of, changing it where we start thinking to our older adults or folks, and then also normalizing it for our kids or our clients or whoever else that nope, this is part of it. That's
Yeah.
okay. And let's talk about why it's uncomfortable that we don't want to talk about it.
Absolutely. Yeah. Just put it all out
Yeah.
on the table. So,
Yeah.
yeah, maybe some therapists out here will get some practice with their own families. And
There
then
you go.
if you can handle that, you can deal with the clients.
Honestly, folks. Yeah. Yes. So
You'll be
that whole dynamic. Yeah. And I would love to hear if people do they feel like they did get good education in their program
yeah.
with older adults and stuff, because I think that's fantastic that,
Right.
yeah, I think it's sometimes taught in social work programs, but I think
Mhm.
again, it's more from the case manager sort of perspective than the psych perspective of it, which is
Yeah.
important. But it's because oftentimes social workers are the ones that do that type of paperwork in settings, but
Right.
um,
Yeah.
in
And
counseling and therapy programs and stuff.
trying to think of because I think in my program there may have been there was like a school social work track, and then I think there may have been an aging track, but that meant like
Hmm.
one elective. Which, I mean, that's great that they even I think they offered. I just might have had, like, a few friends who I knew were interested in it, so that kind of was in
Hmm.
my mind. But, I feel like even if that was the case, that shouldn't necessarily be an elective. That should be part of, like, the actual
Hmm.
curriculum in my
Hmm.
mind.
Yeah.
So, because we also didn't really have space to take electives. I think we were able to take 1 in the 2 years we were
Yeah.
in our program. So it's like,
Yeah.
out of everything out there, it just yeah. So I think it should be embedded. But you're right. I mean, there's probably some programs, and if there are, I would love for people to put in the comments,
Yeah.
where did you
Absolutely.
go?
Hmm.
Where are you getting this education? What resources do you recommend? Because again, the more we have
Absolutely.
we're not going to gatekeep anything, put everything out there because we're all in it together.
Seriously.
So, yes, please.
Nobody's got time for gatekeeping stuff. Yeah.
No, because like you said, we can't do it all. There's too many clients, there's too many
Oh,
situations.
yes. Yes.
Uh, well, again, I just really appreciate you being able to take the time to do this today and
Yeah,
talk
my
about this
pleasure.
subject. I feel like it's making me want to go research some more stuff too. Cause I'm like, wait, I need like a whole list. Cause we'll have referral lists for like if it's
Mhm.
personality disorders, if it's young children, just things I don't
Yeah.
necessarily work with. And I feel like
Yeah.
I need to bump up my list for resources here for older
Mhm.
adults. So
Yeah,
thank you
absolutely.
for
I think
that.
that's important to know those adjacent folks that,
Absolutely.
yeah, will come. Hmm.
Yeah, because it's part of our stuff, like you said, coordination and care too. So
Yeah.
perfect. Well,
Yeah.
is there anything specifically that you're working on or anything that you would want people to know to be able to follow you, see what you're up to?
Yes. Yeah. So many things going on, which is awesome. But whew,
Yeah.
yeah. So folks can follow me on pretty much all the platforms at Sivan Perdue, just
Okay.
my name. My practice name is Purdue Art Therapy. So if you see that, that's the website there. And then I do consulting and coaching with clinicians. To help them through stuff, but then also with caregivers and facilities. If folks are working at a place and want to know more about dementia and sexual health and how to support their older adults in facilities, because that's a whole other thing people don't talk about, but actually happens.
Yeah.
So, again, let's normalize it. And how we can better support our clients that way. And all of that information is at savonpurdue.com. And so they are welcome to go over there. I've got blog posts explaining different things and video series on stuff about the difference between dementia and Alzheimer's and that sort of thing, just kind of in little bits. Yep, I love popping on doing videos and I'm happy to help however. And
Yay.
yeah.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm gonna link everything below, and then I'm also
Mhm.
gonna stalk your website and watch some of
Yeah.
those videos when we're done today because I have a couple hours. So I want to see what's up because again, I want to learn more about all of this too. And I feel
Mhm.
like a big reason why I created this channel is, people say like be who you needed when you were younger. And I kind of take that with this career. And even through this process, though, I'm seeing the gaps in my own education,
Yeah.
which is why, like I said, I love having guests on here where I'm like, oh, you guys are making me think. You're teaching me something new. So I think we should all be open to learning
Yeah.
always.
Absolutely.
So this is really helpful to me personally. So thank you for that. Um,
Yes, absolutely.
so for the viewers, I'm gonna link all of her stuff below. So
Mhm.
follow, see what she's got going on. If you want to follow on with this channel, go ahead and subscribe and you can stay up to date with future episodes. And until next time, thanks guys.